The United States is on the cusp of a new era as Donald J. Trump prepares to return to the White House for a second term. After a tumultuous 4 years out of office, Trump's victory signals a resurgence of his brand of populist politics. His return to power has sent shockwaves across the globe, leaving many to wonder what a second Trump presidency will mean for the world. Trump's first term was marked by controversial policies, including the construction of a wall on the US-Mexico border and a trade war with China. As Trump prepares to take the oath of office once again, all eyes are on Washington, D.C. The world holds its breath, wondering what the future holds. If Donald Trump were to be elected for a second term, it would bring both difficulties and advantages for Canada, and especially for us here in British Columbia. As a neighbor and a major trading partner, Canada really cares about keeping a good relationship with the US. One big question mark is what will happen with trade between our countries. Remember NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement? Well, it was renegotiated and became the USMCA during Trump's first term. Even though that happened, there are still worries about more trade disagreements popping up. GAP 2S. But it's not all bad news. A second Trump term could also open some doors for Canada and BC. For example, Trump likes to spend money on infrastructure projects like roads and bridges. That could mean new business for Canadian companies. Dealing with the US under a second Trump term will take some fancy footwork from our leaders. We'll need smart diplomacy, but we'll also need to be ready to defend what matters to Canadians.
Trump's signature campaign promise, the construction of a wall along the US-Mexico border, remains a contentious issue. While significant portions of the wall have been built, its effectiveness in deterring illegal immigration is still debated.
Beyond the physical barrier, Trump's administration has implemented policies aimed at restricting both legal and illegal immigration. The Remain in Mexico policy has been condemned by human rights groups as inhumane and dangerous.
The administration's decision to end the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals (DACA) program remains tied up in court battles. These policies have created a climate of fear and uncertainty for immigrant communities.
The human cost of Trump's immigration policies is undeniable. The separation of families at the US-Mexico border sparked international condemnation and left lasting scars. Reports of abuse and neglect within detention centers housing migrant children have further fueled outrage. The Trump administration's decision to drastically reduce the number of refugees admitted to the United States has also been met with criticism. The cumulative effect of these policies has been a humanitarian crisis. Okay, so let's talk about how Trump being president again could affect Canada, especially here in BC. His ideas about immigration have already caused a lot of changes. Remember all those people coming to Canada from the US? Yeah, that really stretched our resources thin and got people talking, and not always nicely. GAP 2S. Trump's strong words about immigrants have even changed how we think about newcomers. Even though we're proud of all the different cultures here, sadly we've seen more people being mean to immigrants lately. Trump's economic agenda for his second term hinges on a familiar strategy: tax cuts. Building on the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017, Trump is doubling down on the idea that lower taxes will unleash economic growth.
The administration argues that these tax cuts will stimulate investment, boost job creation, and lead to higher wages for all Americans.
However, critics argue that the 2017 tax cuts primarily benefited the wealthy and corporations, did little to boost wages for average workers, and contributed to a ballooning federal deficit.
Proponents of supply-side economics argue that tax cuts for businesses and high-income earners will spur investment and economic activity. Critics counter that this trickle-down effect is largely a myth.
The potential impact of Trump's tax cuts on the U.S. economy, and by extension on Canada and British Columbia, is uncertain. One of the most immediate impacts of Trump's tax cuts will be felt by corporations. The reduction in the corporate tax rate is a boon for businesses, increasing their profits and freeing up capital for investment. However, the long-term consequences of such a significant corporate tax cut are less clear. Critics argue that it will do little to boost wages or create jobs, as corporations are more likely to use their increased profits for stock buybacks or executive bonuses. They also point out that lower corporate tax revenue will strain government budgets. Furthermore, the potential for a corporate tax cut to spark a race to the bottom is a real concern. The impact of Trump's corporate tax cuts on Canada and British Columbia is twofold, creating both opportunities and pressures. 。 Will good things happen for BC and Canada? It's hard to say. Trump believes that if businesses and rich people pay less in taxes, everyone will eventually be better off. That's called trickle-down economics. But for many years, people have argued about whether trickle-down economics really works. Some people say that tax cuts mostly help the rich, and not regular people. What will happen in Canada and here in BC if Trump tries trickle-down economics again? We don't know for sure. If the US economy gets a lot stronger, maybe people there will buy more things from Canada. The art of the deal, Trump style. Trade is another arena where Trump's America First philosophy takes center stage. His approach to trade is characterized by a disdain for multilateral agreements and a preference for bilateral deals. During his first term, Trump upended decades of United States trade policy by withdrawing from the Trans-Pacific Partnership and renegotiating NAFTA. He also imposed tariffs on billions of dollars worth of goods imported from China, sparking a trade war. While there are legitimate concerns about China's trade practices, critics argue that Trump's approach is counterproductive and harmful to the global economy. China in the crosshairs. China has become the primary target of Trump's trade ire. Trump accuses China of engaging in unfair trade practices, costing the United States millions of jobs. To address these perceived imbalances, Trump has imposed tariffs on hundreds of billions of dollars worth of Chinese goods. The ongoing trade war between the United States and China has created uncertainty in the global economy. Section 1. A rollback of rights, defining diversity down. Trump's second term signals a potential rollback of diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. Critics argue these changes could erode protections for marginalized communities. The administration's stance on defining gender has sparked significant controversy. LGBTQ+ advocates argue it denies transgender experiences and could increase discrimination. Section 2. Transgender rights under fire. A battle for recognition. The Trump administration's stance on transgender rights has been a focal point of controversy. Trump's stated intention to define gender based on biological sex at birth directly challenges the rights and identities of transgender individuals. This policy shift, if implemented, could have wide-ranging implications for transgender Americans, affecting their access to healthcare, education, employment, and even their ability to participate in everyday life.
The administration's position on transgender rights aligns with the views of some conservative groups who argue that recognizing transgender identities undermines traditional gender roles and creates confusion. They often cite concerns about bathroom access and participation in sports as reasons to restrict transgender rights.
However, LGBTQ+ advocates and allies argue that defining gender based solely on biological sex at birth is discriminatory and ignores the scientific consensus on gender identity. They emphasize that transgender people have always existed, and that denying their identities and experiences causes real harm.
The battle over transgender rights is likely to intensify in Trump's second term, with legal challenges and protests anticipated in response to any policy changes. The outcome of this struggle will have a profound impact on the lives of transgender Americans and the broader fight for LGBTQ+ equality.
Section 3. The fight for equality continues. Resistance and resilience. Despite the potential setbacks to civil rights under the Trump administration, the fight for equality continues. Across the United States, individuals, organizations, and communities are mobilizing to resist discriminatory policies and protect the rights of marginalized groups.
From legal challenges to grassroots activism, the spirit of resistance is strong. Civil rights groups are gearing up for legal battles against any policies deemed discriminatory. They are prepared to challenge the administration's actions in court, leveraging legal precedents and constitutional protections to defend the rights of vulnerable communities.
Beyond the courtroom, grassroots movements are building momentum. Organizations advocating for LGBTQ+ rights, racial justice, women's rights, and disability rights are joining forces to amplify their voices and push back against discriminatory policies. Protests, demonstrations, and public awareness campaigns are raising awareness and mobilizing support for the fight for equality.
The resilience of the fight for civil rights is deeply rooted in American history. From the civil rights movement to the fight for marriage equality, the struggle for equal rights has always been met with resistance, but it has also consistently pushed the boundaries of inclusion and justice. The challenges ahead are significant, but the commitment to equality remains unwavering.
Trump's vision for education centers around shifting control to individual states, advocating for the closure of the Department of Education. This proposal has sparked debate, with supporters praising local autonomy and opponents warning of weakened national standards. Advocates argue it fosters innovation, while critics fear increased inequality and weakened civil rights protections. The debate reflects deep beliefs about federal versus state power in education. Trump's proposal could have far-reaching consequences for American education. Section 2. A patchwork of education equity at stake. The potential consequences of dismantling the Department of Education and handing control of education to individual states are vast and complex, with equity emerging as a central concern. Critics argue it could widen the achievement gap between students from different backgrounds. States with limited resources may struggle to fund education adequately, leading to disparities in teacher quality and access to technology. Proponents argue state control fosters innovation and local responsiveness. The debate reflects differing views on government's role and educational equity. The Affordable Care Act, or Obamacare, has long been a target of Trump's ire. He vowed to repeal and replace it, but a full repeal proved elusive. The ACA's future remains uncertain as Trump returns to the White House. It expanded coverage to millions, providing subsidies and protections. Critics cite rising premiums and limited plan choices. The legal battle continues, with its fate potentially in the Supreme Court's hands. Millions could lose coverage, causing widespread anxiety. Trump's second term brings a shift in public health priorities, emphasizing individual choice and skepticism of government intervention. This is evident in the handling of the COVID-19 pandemic, favoring individual responsibility over mandates. The partnership with vaccine skeptic Robert F. Kennedy Jr. raises concerns among public health experts. The administration's approach reflects a libertarian shift, prioritizing personal freedom over regulation. The impact on public health remains to be seen. Trump's return to the White House signals a potential U-turn on climate policy, with a renewed emphasis on fossil fuel production. His energy agenda prioritizes energy independence and a resurgence of the coal industry. Despite environmental consequences, Trump remains steadfast in his support for fossil fuels. His administration champions deregulation, rolling back Obama-era rules on greenhouse gas emissions. This focus on fossil fuels faces fierce opposition from environmental groups and scientists. They argue it will accelerate climate change and undermine clean energy efforts. A planet in peril. Environmental concerns take a backseat. The Trump administration's stance on climate change has been controversial. Trump has called climate change a hoax and prioritized economic growth over environmental protection. His withdrawal from the Paris Agreement isolated the U.S. and undermined global climate efforts. The Biden administration has rejoined the agreement, but repairing the damage will take time. America First Redux, a retreat from global engagement. Trump's second term continues his America First approach, marked by skepticism of multilateralism, transactional diplomacy, and unilateral use of power. This departs from previous administrations' focus on international cooperation. Trump favors bilateral agreements for greater leverage. His approach prioritizes immediate gains over long-term strategy.
World leaders are divided, seeing both opportunity and risk.
The potential consequences of a weakened NATO are significant. A less cohesive alliance could embolden Russia in Eastern Europe, undermine efforts to deter aggression from countries like Iran, and make it more difficult to address shared challenges such as terrorism. European leaders question the future of the transatlantic relationship and their ability to rely on the United States as a security guarantor. Trump's approach to NATO reflects a broader shift in American foreign policy away from the post-World War II consensus. While most NATO members have committed to increasing defense spending, Trump's rhetoric and his decision to withdraw the United States from the Intermediate-Range Nuclear Forces Treaty, a Cold War-era arms control agreement with Russia, have raised concerns about his commitment to the alliance and his understanding of European security concerns. He has also criticized NATO members for not spending enough on defense, demanding that they increase their military budgets to meet the alliance's target of 2% of GDP. Trump has repeatedly questioned the value of NATO, arguing that it is outdated, overly reliant on the United States, and failing to address contemporary security challenges such as terrorism and cyber warfare. Alliances strain NATO and the future of transatlantic relations. Trump's America. First approach to foreign policy has put a significant strain on America's traditional alliances, particularly with its NATO partners in Europe. The world takes note. Uncertainty and the global balance of power. Trump's America. First policy has introduced uncertainty, challenging the U.S. role and shifting global power.
Nations adjust, impacting peace, security, and prosperity.
Authoritarian leaders are empowered and democratic norms erode.
Trump's praise for strongmen emboldens authoritarianism.
His retreat creates a vacuum, with China expanding influence.
China promotes its model, modernizes military, and forges partnerships.
The rise of China challenges the liberal international order.
The rules-based system is under strain, democracy and human rights challenged.
The world faces profound change and uncertainty. U.S. choices will shape the future of the international system. Canada at a crossroads. After another big U.S. election, Canada is at a crossroads. If Trump wins again, we can expect more of the same surprising policies we saw in his first term. This creates both problems and chances for Canada. We need to protect what matters to us while still getting along with our powerful neighbor. It's a tricky balancing act. Trump's policies, especially his trade wars and tax cuts, could affect Canada. Our businesses and workers might feel the impact. Canada and the U.S. might disagree even more on things like protecting the environment and LGBTQ+ rights. These are areas where Canadians have different values than the Trump administration. But even with these problems, there are chances for Canada. The U.S. is still our biggest trading partner. Our economies are very connected. Canadian businesses are tough. They've handled changing trade rules before. Maybe we can find new opportunities as things change around the world or team up with other countries in new areas. Also, Trump left some world groups. This gives Canada a chance to step up. By working with other countries and supporting international rules, Canada can help build a safer and better world. So, how do we move forward with the U.S. during Trump's second term? It's tricky, but we must be smart. Stand up for our values but be practical. Find common ground with the U.S., strengthen Canada through education and technology, build a diverse economy, cooperate on trade and safety, strengthen global relationships, stick to our values, work together, and thrive.